From battlefields to politics, the Syrian Democratic Forces announced their dissolution after merging with the Syrian army. But what is behind the SDF's deal with Damascus? And what hurdles will this integration pose for post-Assad Syria? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Frankie McCamley. Founded in 2015 at the height of the Syrian war, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces have officially dissolved. The SDF has integrated with the Syrian army following a deal with Damascus. The group's thousands of fighters controlled large parts of northern Syria. But after the regime of Bashar al Assad collapsed in December 2024, the army launched an offensive in the region. The SDF lost much of its territory and agreed to merge with the National Armed Forces. Its former commander, Mazloum Abdi, announced that the circumstances had changed, but promised he would work to guarantee Kurdish rights are protected under Syria's constitution. So what does the deal between Damascus and the SDF mean for Syria after the fall of Assad? We'll discuss this with our guests in a moment. But first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
The Syrian Democratic Forces has announced it has dissolved as an independent fighting force and has integrated into the Syrian army. Their leader explains Syria is a different place than it was when they were formed.
Since the establishment of the Syrian Democratic Forces, its fighters have shouldered a major responsibility during one of the most difficult periods Syria has gone through. They liberated many Syrian cities and towns, first from the rule of the Ba'ath Party and later from the terror of ISIL.
The Syrian Democratic Forces were formed in 2015 as an alliance between the Kurdish People's Protection Units and Arab militias. It had support from the US and was the West's main partner in the fight against ISIL. By 2022, the SDF had control of roughly a quarter of Syria, mostly in the northeast, an important oil and agricultural area. It was run by an autonomous Kurdish administration. But in 2024, the regime of Bashar al Assad collapsed. When President Ahmed Sharaa took power, he said he wanted unity. And neighbouring Turkey has long objected to an autonomous Kurdish region on its southern border. By March 2025, Sharaa and the SDF started discussing integration. But those talks stalled as Abdi wanted the SDF to maintain its own units. Then, in January 2026, the Syrian army launched a rapid offensive, seizing most of the SDF-held territory, including large parts of Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. Soon after, the SDF accepted integration. Mazloum Abdi has reportedly been appointed as an advisor to the president. And the Kurds have been assured roles in the state institutions, and that education can continue in Kurdish. Some Kurds say they hope that is true.
Integration is a positive thing, provided they fulfill the promises they have made and that our region and institutions remain under our control, not merely receiving orders from the authorities in Damascus. If this does not happen, it would mean that all the Kurds who were killed died in vain.
Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Alexandria in Egypt is Noah Bonsey, a senior advisor at the International Crisis Group. He focuses on regional conflict dynamics in Syria. Yusuf Alabarda, he is an international security and politics analyst and former NATO officer. He is in Ankara. And Kenneth Katzman also joins us. He's a senior fellow at the Soufan Centre and specialises in Middle East geopolitics. And Kenneth joins us from Washington, D.C. A warm welcome to all of you to an Inside Story. Noah, I want to start with you. That report we were hearing focused at the end on how people in Syria are feeling about this agreement. I understand you do travel to Syria quite often. You've been involved in diplomacy in the country. What is your assessment of how people are feeling before we get to the politics?
Well, look, I think it's important to say that a lot of questions remain about what actual implementation will look like. And so especially in Syria's northeast, particularly among Kurdish populations there, they will still be wondering what this will look like on the ground moving forward. But overall, I think it's helpful to look back, as your report did, at where things were back in January of this year, right? Months of negotiations had hit a wall. There were weeks of armed confrontation. Syrian government forces advanced quite dramatically. The SDF lost much of its territorial leverage. So relative to where things were then, when the potential scenarios looked very grim and you could have had ongoing conflict that could have gotten very ugly, the fact that both sides at that moment shifted from the battlefield to the negotiating table, they reached the initial framework for an integration agreement on January 29th of this year. Ever since, you've had a steady process of negotiating what the details look like. So while where things are today may not look as good as many in Northeast Syria had hoped in previous years, relative to where they looked in January, and I think in ways in which they could have gotten worse, this is a win-win for both sides, and I think for everyone in Syria.
And you talk about the details there. I just want to drill into some of the details there. The SDF saying its mission is complete. We now have a new appointment for Mazloum Abdi. He's an advisor to the president. What exactly does that mean, and how much influence will he have?
We don't know the answer to that question yet, right? It's certainly a significant position that Mazloum has been given, and this was, exactly what role he and a few other senior figures in the SDF would be playing in the Syrian state moving forward was a remaining gap that the sides have been negotiating over previous months. The fact that they've reached an agreement is significant. We'll see what the details of Mazloum's role look like in practical terms moving forward. But the bottom line is he's a person who has a significant amount of credibility, certainly in Northeast Syria, really throughout much of Syria. Internationally, obviously, he's been a major player for years as the leader of the SDF. So it's win-win in the sense that he and the SDF in general are now getting a bigger role in the Syrian state moving forward. And the Syrian state will be enriched through the capacity that he and others in the SDF bring to the table in counterterrorism, in helping secure Northeast Syria and its borders. So again, the road to get here has not been easy, that's for sure. But I think this is a good day today, looking forward.
Okay, and talking borders, I want to bring you in, Yusuf. What does Ankara think of this agreement? Is this genuine integration, or is this actually the dismantling of the SDF?
Yeah, this is a real integration which Turkey supports since the start of this year, after the SDF forces was pushed back by the Syrian armed forces. For this reason, this is a win-win situation, as the other guest has underlined. From the point of perspective of Ankara, the integration of the SDF, let's say, and the other issues to the Syrian state institutions will strengthen the power of the Syrian government and the Syrian state. And also, since it is a win-win situation, all the people who is living inside Turkey as a minority will also have a chance to take all their rights, identical rights, which Turkey supports not only inside Syria, but also inside Turkey and also inside Iraq.
And I want to talk about those rights and what's been promised to the Kurdish population in a moment. But Kenneth, just bringing you in now, how is this agreement being viewed in Washington? Is this a win for the West? And how involved was the US from your perspective on these negotiations?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I would say from Mr. Trump's perspective, it's an okay agreement. It's not exactly what the US wanted, but for strategic reasons, the United States wants to work with Mr. al-Shara, his new government. Syria, the fact that Assad is gone and the Shara government is there is a major strategic win for the United States, particularly at a time now when we need Syria to be against Iran. It is against Iran. It's going to be helpful in countering Iran long term. So the U.S. is accepting this agreement. Again, it's a little painful for the United States because the SDF was the key U.S. partner against the ISIS, the Islamic State, and it's certainly never that comfortable when the U.S. sees a partner partner faction sort of dismantled or integrated, but it's okay. Mr. Shara has given some promises for Kurdish rights. I believe the administration will hold him to those promises, and I think the U.S. is going to move on. Again, the main interest is in Shara's government. It's a partner not only against Iran but against its proxies such as Hezbollah. And that's the main thing: is having this new U.S.-Syrian relationship post-Assad, having that be intact and working for stabilizing the region.
And Noah, I can see you nodding there to Kenneth. What's your response to that?
Absolutely, and I think one, as Kenneth outlines, the extent, the depth, the importance of the U.S.-Syrian relationship would have been impossible to imagine a few years ago, right? Given the background of current Syrian leadership. And it's a relationship we can really describe as strategic at this stage and deepening by the day. It's very interesting the role that U.S. mediation played in all of this. For months last year, during on-again, off-again talks between Damascus and the SDF, the U.S., led by Special Envoy Tom Barrack, were very involved. That didn't really facilitate any breakthroughs, in large part because the SDF was holding its cards very close, probably overplaying them, holding those cards too long. Fast forward to the last few months, the U.S. has still been supporting the negotiations, but it's been doing so in a more reserved way, not necessarily in the room for most of the conversations, but supporting and engaging with the parties on the side. That's proven pretty effective here. Again, the credit goes primarily to the leaderships in Damascus. The Syrian president, the foreign minister have been the key top people involved. The SDF's leadership, they've made tough compromises when it would have been easy not to, and to shift back towards military options. So there's plenty of credit to go all around here. Also, still some remaining challenges. There are gaps that are still going to have to be fleshed out in the weeks and months ahead.
Well, let's talk compromises. You say tough compromises, but by January, the balance of power, the SDF had lost a lot of its ground. What leverage did it have when it came to these negotiations? And what would President al-Shara have to have conceded, if anything?
Well, for sure, the SDF lost a great deal of its leverage, a great deal of its territory, a great deal of its forces in terms of people defecting during that January battle, as well as a lot of the resources, the oil they controlled. However, again, things could have continued to get worse, right? They had an option to continue waging insurgency, just as Damascus had an option to keep pressing forward militarily all the way to the border. Both did not. So there was some certain implicit military leverage on both sides that both decided to hold in reserve and to go to the negotiating table. Also, because of the years of very significant U.S. support and support from others in the U.S.-led coalition against ISIS for the SDF, the relationships that were built over time, Washington and other international players were making clear they wanted a reasonable deal for the SDF, for Northeast Syria in general, and for the millions of people living there. And so I think Damascus understood that it had incentive to make some concessions to the SDF. I think also, again, there's, regardless of the international dynamics, the Syrian state as a whole benefits from deepening the participation of SDF leadership and forces in it, as I mentioned earlier. So could Damascus have held out for more and given less? They could have. Thankfully, they did not, and that's, again, to their credit.
Yusuf, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. Do you think Damascus gave the SDF too much? Positions of power, integration? What are your thoughts?
We cannot wait whether it is too much or less, but I can say that Damascus also will get the benefit with this integration, because Damascus needs stability, especially since from last year I have visited for many times the Damascus, the Aleppo, but I have seen that people need silence, people need welfare, people need also the security. For this reason, everybody is taking the advantage of this integration. So when you take a look at the position of the SDF, who win, who lost, I cannot say that anyone lost. I can say that everyone has win from this situation if the integration becomes successful in the next coming months. I can also say that a stable Syria also will help to the interests of United States, which protects the border of Israel since from the revolution 1.5 years. There is no single attack from the Syrian lands to the security of Israel. So when I take a look at to the vice versa, more than 3,000 attacks coming from the Israel, and that is putting a reality that there is no threat that stems from Syria, like in the old days, the Hezbollah and other armed groups continuously attacking to the Lebanon or to the Israel side. For this reason, that is a win-win not only for Syria, that is also a win-win for Iraq, for a win-win for Israel, a win-win for United States and also Turkey.
Kenneth, I want to talk integration of these forces. We have thousands of men and women who worked for the SDF. They are now being integrated into an army that they were only fighting against months ago. How does Washington see this integration truly working, and what would it see as the main obstacles here?
Well, yeah, I think Washington is pleased that there's no fighting. I mean, again, as I said in my few minutes ago, the main U.S. interest is that the new government of al-Shara be stable, sovereign, capable. As your guest in Ankara said, again, no threats to Israel emanating from Syria. So I think Washington is comfortable with the deal. It's not exactly what the U.S. wanted or what the Kurds wanted. I think the Kurds in Syria were imagining when Assad fell in 2024 that they would get some sort of arrangement like the Kurds in Iraq got with very substantial autonomy. Obviously, in northern Iraq, the Kurds have basically their own government in three big provinces in all of northern Iraq. And the Syrian Kurds didn't get that. I think Turkey certainly used its influence with al-Shara to make sure that didn't happen. Turkey is, I think, much more comfortable with this agreement than Washington is, but the U.S. and Turkey are allies too. So, everybody's aligned with everybody and everybody's working with everybody. So it's the best deal everybody could have gotten. I think in reference to what we were talking about, Washington's been a little bit displeased with Israel. It was mentioned Israel's been carving out a buffer zone in southern Syria, and Washington is not that comfortable. Washington wants the Shara government to be sovereign, not at war, no tension on the border. And the Israelis have taken more of a hard line, very suspicious, very cautious. And again, they've done some military activities. They did bomb a base in northern Syria where they suspected Turkey was going to operate there. So I think the U.S. but the U.S. encouraged Israel to send the Mossad chief to meet with Syria 3 days ago. So the U.S. is trying to make sure that Syria is not a source of conflict and there's no conflict within Syria either.
Okay, Noah, just to bring you in on this as well, when we're talking about the integration of these forces as well and the hurdles that this faces, I know you've focused on regional conflict dynamics in Syria, so I'd really like to get your thoughts on the actual integration process. And we can't forget that there are some units in the SDF that didn't want this integration at all.
Right. It's a great question. And I think it's worth bringing in the sort of trans-border dynamic here, looking back at the links between the SDF and the broader PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party in Turkey. And what you have right now between Turkey and the PKK on one hand and between the SDF and Damascus on the other is a sort of mutually reinforcing positive dynamic in which a political process in Turkey, between Turkey, the Turkish state, and the PKK, which has been steadily moving forward over the last year or so, and has made new ground in the last few weeks, that has benefited from and benefited the process between the SDF and Damascus. So as tensions lower between Turkey and the PKK, that reflects well in northeast Syria and vice versa. And that has helped convince some of the, let's say, more reluctant, so as not to say hardline, elements of the SDF who might have been more reluctant to go along with this integration deal had there not been so much progress between Turkey and the PKK simultaneously. The other thing I think we should note is we just look at the bigger picture, and at the risk of sounding too optimistic, we can hope that some of the elements of the integration deal, the SDF and Damascus are continuing to flesh out, could ultimately use eventually to support negotiations and eventually reach an agreement between the province of Suedat, the Druze majority province of Suedat in southern Syria, and Damascus. That area currently remains largely out of Damascus's control. Can elements of this integration deal eventually be applied there? And outside of Syria, obviously in the region and beyond, you have armed non-state actors playing major roles in a range of countries. What lessons might ultimately we be able to draw from what has gone wrong, but also more recently what has gone right between the SDF and Damascus?
It's such an interesting time for Syria. Kenneth, I would like to focus on the Kurdish population now. The new government, of course, has made multiple promises to them. If the government was not to stick to those promises, do you think that there would be a case for Washington to step in?
Do you want an honest answer to that? I'll give you an honest answer to that. The answer is no, for the reasons I've stated earlier. The main U.S. interest is in the al-Shara government. The U.S. is certainly going to raise this with al-Shara and press him at times, but it's not going to penalize al-Shara. It's not. You remember, the U.S. just dismantled sanctions on Syria. The U.S. just 2 days ago, before this integration, the U.S. took Syria off the terrorism list. Remember, Syria was an original founding member of the terrorism list in 1979. And the U.S. also delisted the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group of al-Shara as a specially designated global terrorist. So the U.S. is not going to ruin or injure its relations with al-Shara over the Kurdish issue, as the same in Iraq. The U.S. deals with Baghdad. It doesn't necessarily, defend everything the Kurds want or support everything the Kurds in Iraq wants. It's the same issue. The strategic interest is in Damascus, not northeast Syria, and that's a kind of an honest answer. It's maybe not the answer Kurds are looking for, but that's the answer I would give them.
We appreciate honesty on this programme. Thank you very much, Kenneth. Yusuf, I'd like to just get your response to that and your thoughts on that.
For sure, because during the Assad regime in 2010, Turkey was the only country who was sitting to the table of Mr. Assad and pushing himself to take actions against the rights of the Kurdish people, because during the Assad regime, there were no Kurdish rights inside Syria, and Turkey was the only country who was pressing the Assad regime before the civil war erupted. Please give all the individual rights of the Kurdish people inside Syria. For this reason, if the Damascus does not keep its promises against all kind of ethnic groups or faithful groups, different groups, Turkey will no doubt press to Damascus if necessary to give the rights of the Kurdish people inside Syria, because Turkey believes that only stability and the welfare position of all these countries may bring them together, and you can create a very well-being region, including Iraq and Syria and Turkey. For this reason, Turkey is not against for the Kurdish people who takes their rights from the Damascus. Opposite of this, Turkey is supporting all the Kurdish people should take all their rights from the Damascus, because the process now is also keeping up inside Turkey a terror-free region project, let's say. For this reason, Turkey will step in such kind of situation appears in the next coming months.
So, Yusuf, what exactly would Ankara be looking out for to just make sure that this is all going through smoothly? Would there be any pressure points it's watching?
So far, no, because Turkey has very close relations with the Damascus government. Every month, a couple of different ministers are coming to Turkey, and Turkish ministers are going to Damascus. They are also building economical projects together with them. The day before yesterday, the embassy of Turkey to Damascus clearly stated that they are building a project from the perspective of education, because there are more than 2 million people who is living inside Syria now, which has been welcomed by Turkey for many years. So their kids were raised inside Turkey. So what's gonna happen in the next coming days? Those kids were raised inside the Turkish schools, but now they went to the Arabic schools inside Syria. For this reason, Turkey is coordinating the issue in a very intense way. So I do not think that there will be a problem from this point of perspective.
OK, well, thank you. And really interesting to end on that point, talking about the people of Syria and how they'll be affected, because, of course, there is a lot of work to be done in the country. Thank you to all of our guests, to Noah Bonsey, Yusuf Alabarda and Kenneth Katzman. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join in the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Frankie McCamley, and the team here. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in a moment. Stay tuned.